Okay, welcome to video 3 of Unit 5. Today we're going to talk about some of the MVPs of the Enlightenment. So some pretty important thinkers coming about today. Make sure you're taking your notes. Press pause, rewind if you need to go back because you missed something. So let's jump on in. Lots of people to talk about. So, like I said, we're talking about the MVPs of the Enlightenment. Remember at the end of the last video, I mentioned that there was a major clash of ideas between the age of absolutism and the age of enlightenment. Okay, and it's all thanks to these guys, the Philosophes. This is a group of intellectual, forward-thinking men and women during the Age of Enlightenment who studied philosophy, history, science, politics, economics, and other social issues as well. They also looked for any issues or weaknesses in society that needed to be improved. So you already know that there will be a clash between the old ways of thinking and new ways. So what do you think is going to be the first topic? If you thought absolutism, you are absolutely right. So there's no way that these enlightened thinkers were going to agree with this whole concept of absolutism, except for this guy, Thomas Hobbes. Hobbes was best known for his writing Leviathan, which he wrote while he was exiled to Paris after Charles I had been found guilty of treason and publicly executed. He fled because of his strong royalist views and support for the monarchy. He supported the idea of absolutism. It did not matter to him if it were a monarchy, an oligarchy, or a democracy. All that mattered to him was that government had unconditional power to force the people to obey. His big belief was that humans exist in a primitive state of nature and therefore consent to government only for self-preservation. In other words, to protect themselves. For each of the Philosophes that we're learning about today, I'm going to give you a memory trick to help you remember these folks. So here's your memory trick for Hobbes. Hobbes hated people. Capitalize and underline the H in Hobbes and the H in hated. He clearly did not believe that people were capable of governing themselves. So if you think back to when we did our activity, our island activity in class, and you guys had to set up your own government, Hobbes would have taken Hobbes would have totally taken like you guys, what you did in class, and he would have been like, see, look, here's proof. These people can't govern themselves. So Hobbes hated people. He felt like there definitely needed to be some government in place to keep people under control. All right, on to John Locke. This is John Locke. He lived from 1632 until 1704. He was an educated man, studied medicine at Oxford University in Oxford, England, but became interested in politics in 1672 when he was appointed to a secretarial position with the Board of Trade. He wrote 2 treatises on government in which he supported the overthrow of James II and the Glorious Revolution, which you should remember was the bloodless transfer of power to William and Mary as rulers of England. He supported a democracy, but was okay with a constitutional monarchy, which is when the monarchy, like the king or queen, exists within the boundaries outlined in a written document like a constitution. John Locke is often considered to be the first philosopher. His view of how government should be is that it is an agreement or a social contract between the people and the government. His big belief was that humans are sovereign, meaning that they can rule themselves, and that they agree to government for protection of their natural rights, which are life, liberty, and property. Okay, life, liberty, and property, that's John Locke. So here's your memory trick for Locke. Locke loves people. Locke loves people, thinks they can totally govern themselves if they're able to. Okay, onto this handsome fellow, Baron de Montesquieu. Baron de Montesquieu was a French philosopher who loved studying political liberty. His most famous book was The Spirit of Laws, in which he shared his big belief that the best form of government was one that included a separation of powers, such as 3 branches and a system of checks and balances. Does any of that sound familiar? So if you think back to your civics class in middle school, think back. Anything sound familiar here? So Locke felt that this would keep any one individual from having too much power and therefore abusing that power. He is a big time supporter of separation of powers. And so here is your memory trick for Montesquieu. So his name has 3 syllables, right? Montesquieu. So the way that you're going to remember him, Montesquieu and separate, okay? Or separate, okay? So Montesquieu, separate. They both have 3 syllables. Now look, here's the deal. You cannot sit on your SOL test. You cannot sit there and go, because you know how you count out syllables in middle school or elementary school, you go Montesquieu, right? You clap your hands. You can't do that, okay? So you can sit there and you can like tap your head and look really smart like you're thinking Montesquieu, separate, okay? I don't want you actually clapping out the syllables when you're taking your SOL test. All right, so Montesquieu is all about having separate branches of government, okay? 3 separate branches. So that brings us to our next guy, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He was a Swiss man who truly believed that people are essentially good and that it is society and civilization that corrupted people's natural goodness. He wrote The Social Contract, and his big belief was that the government is a contract between the leaders and the people, that the people are free to create a government that is guided by the general will of society. So this is also known as a direct democracy. Now, of course, if you'll remember from the beginning of this topic, not everyone is going to agree with these enlightened thoughts. Of course, the noble class and the monarchs did not agree with this whole idea of direct democracy and a social contract with common people. Because, I mean, let's be real. Common people can't rule themselves, right? Well, that's what some people thought back then. Not the case with Rousseau, though. So your memory trick for him is that Rousseau's contract made some people happy. So your wealthy class, your nobles, your monarchies, they certainly did not agree with his line of thinking on things. So that's why it made some people happy. All right, here's our next guy, Voltaire. Voltaire, which is a pen name, his given name was actually Francois-Marie Arouet. He wrote more than 70 books. He is known for Philosophical Letters, which was a satire in which he used sarcasm, irony, and ridicule against his opponents. He often targeted the noble class, clergy, aristocrats, and the government. He had lots of people who did not like him so much, because you got to think about it, like he's kind of making fun and being sarcastic about this really big influential group of people. They're not going to be so happy about that. His big belief was that there should be a separation of church and state, that there should be freedom of religion, speech, and thought. So while he ridiculed much of the corruption within the church, he was a big supporter of religious tolerance, both freedom of religion and freedom from religion, meaning that no one should be forced to believe something that they simply don't believe. Now, I love this quote from Voltaire. He said, quote, "I do not agree with a word you say, but will defend to the death your right to say it," end quote. So I really like that. He's saying, I don't like what you have to say. I don't agree with you, but you have a right to say it. All right, so let me pop back in here for a second and give you your memory trick for Voltaire. So Voltaire was very tolerant of religions. So make sure you capitalize your V for Voltaire and your V for very. Okay. He also was all about separation of church and state. So if you take your fingers, right? Let me figure out which direction I need to go. This way. Okay. So if you take your fingers and you split them, as in separate of church and state, you make a V. So Voltaire is separate. Okay. So separation of church and state, Voltaire. He was very tolerant of all religions. Okay. All right. So that leads us on to Mary Wollstonecraft, who is our last philosopher today. This is Mary Wollstonecraft. She wrote A Vindication of the Rights of Women. Her big belief was that equal rights must include women. She disagreed with Rousseau, who thought that a woman's education should be second to that of a man's, meaning that the men should be educated before the women should be. But Wollstonecraft, she wrote that women needed to be educated in order to be virtuous and useful. She highly encouraged women to enter into male-dominated fields like medicine and politics. She definitely supported equal rights. And your memory trick for her is that she is the only woman. Okay. All right. So that wraps up our Philosophes. Next time, we're going to go into seeing how these new ideas, these new ways of thinking are going to influence politics and cultures within different countries. Revolutions are coming. They're coming. So we'll see you then.